Charles Geneviève Louis Auguste André Timothée d'Aon de Beaumont. Born in Burgundy in 1728, he was an educated lawyer, a brilliant fencer, and an ambitious intellectual. He served King Louis XV not just as a diplomat, but also as a secret agent, infiltrating the most exclusive circles and undertaking daring missions, even reaching the court of Russian Empress Elizabeth Petrovna. His career soared, making him one of the French crown's most trusted individuals, known for his sharp mind and fearlessness. But then, at the height of his career as a man, the unthinkable happened. The Chevalier d'Aon declared himself a woman. And it is here that a grand mystification begins, one that distorted history for decades. A popular myth claims that d'Aon was merely a woman from the start, skillfully disguised as a man. However, the facts suggest something entirely different. The roots of this incredible transformation delve much deeper into his very childhood and youth. Charles d'Aon was born in Burgundy into a family where his father, Louis-François d'Aon, harbored immeasurable ambitions. He desperately yearned for a male heir who could revive the fading glory of their ancient lineage and augment the family fortune. Thus, from Charles's very first breath, the weight of these colossal expectations fell upon him. From the earliest age, he was raised not merely as a boy, but as the future pillar of the family, a bearer of honor, a warrior, a diplomat, everything required for triumphant prosperity in the harsh, unforgiving 18th century. Every step he took, every achievement, from his virtuosic mastery of the sword to his brilliant success in jurisprudence, was aimed at conforming to this powerful, imposed male role. He didn't just play the part, he became it, building his entire identity around the masculinity, strength, fearlessness, and intellectual superiority so valued at the court of Louis XIV. His career was not merely a series of brilliant missions, but a testament to his ability to masterfully embody this role. However, as is often the case with individuals living under the heavy burden of others' expectations and external roles, a breaking point eventually arrives. For d'Aon, this turning point coincided with a sharp and humiliating decline in his career. After returning from Russia and England, where he had undertaken complex, at times life-threatening, secret missions, his contributions were unexpectedly devalued. He faced cruel court intrigues, absurd accusations of embezzlement, the denial of a pension promised by the king, and the complete loss of all his posts. The man who, just yesterday, had been one of the French crown's most trusted individuals, now found himself in disgrace, on the verge of complete financial ruin and political oblivion. This was not merely a career crisis. It was a devastating existential blow to everything Charles d'Aon had built over 50 years. His male identity, so meticulously cultivated, successfully realized, and confirmed by years of service, suddenly proved utterly powerless in the face of ruthless court intrigues and royal displeasure. It was at this moment of profound despair, when all familiar supports had collapsed and his male role no longer guaranteed safety or status, that the Chevalier d'Aon made his boldest and most desperate move. He didn't merely declare himself a woman, he began living as the Chevalier de Beaumont, and later as Mademoiselle d'Aon, using this new persona not as an expression of innate femininity, but as a powerful tool for survival. In his past, there may have been instances of using female attire for disguise during espionage operations, not as a personal choice, but as a cold-blooded tactical maneuver. Now, however, it became not just a tactic, but a comprehensive strategy, a final desperate attempt to regain influence, avoid persecution, and perhaps even exact revenge on his numerous enemies. This was a true point of no return, where personal drama, psychological pressure, and political maneuvering merged, transforming his life into something far more complex than a mere gender transition. It was an act of desperate self-preservation, a grandiose metamorphosis designed not only to save him, but also to forever change the rules of the game in high society. However, this desperate move, which seems so incredible today, was unthinkable outside the context of that era. France in the second half of the 18th century was a bubbling cauldron of contradictions, an ideal stage for grand maneuvers and radical changes. The power of King Louis XV, once absolute, was gradually waning, dissolving into court intrigues and growing public discontent. The nation's economy, exhausted by endless wars and court extravagance, teetered on the brink of collapse, giving rise to widespread poverty and social tension. Against this backdrop of financial and political chaos, a culture of secrecy and backroom dealings thrived. The King's Secret, a clandestine network of diplomats and spies in which Charles d'Eon played a pivotal role, demonstrated how deeply deceit and double-dealing were woven into the very fabric of state governance. This was an era when a reputation could be made or destroyed by a single rumor, when newspapers and pamphlets circulated throughout Europe wielded unprecedented power over minds, and when scandal became a potent weapon in the struggle for influence. Society, on one hand, was deeply conservative, adhering to strict gender roles and class distinctions. On the other, it eagerly consumed everything unusual, sensational, and outside the norm. Parisian salons buzzed with discussions of Enlightenment philosophies, but gossiped with no less fervor about aristocrats whose eccentric antics became subjects of widespread attention. In this world, where masquerade and theatricality were part of daily high society life, where the lines between truth and fiction often blurred, and personal drama easily transformed into a public spectacle, a unique opportunity for an unprecedented transformation arose. The ground for such a daring scheme was more than fertile. These very conditions made possible not only the survival of the Chevalier d'Eon, but also his transformation into one of the most notorious and discussed figures of his time, whose story became a symbol of an era of intrigue, hypocrisy, and incredible metamorphoses. It was at this point when Charles d'Eon realized that his meticulously constructed male identity proved useless in the face of court intrigues that he launched his boldest game. He didn't merely declare his female essence, he initiated a full-scale campaign that transformed his gender identity into a powerful weapon. The first step was to create an aura of mystery and scandal around himself. Rumors about his true sex, fueled by d'Eon himself, began spreading like wildfire through Parisian salons and then across Europe. D'Eon did not deny them. On the contrary, he fed them, playing on society's curiosity. Soon, a betting pool formed around his figure. Thousands of people, from common onlookers to aristocrats and even members of the royal family, placed wagers on whether the Chevalier d'Eon was a man or a woman. This public obsession with his sex became his first brilliantly executed ploy. It not only diverted attention from his disgraced position, but also elevated him to the status of a living sensation, whose fate captivated minds from London to St. Petersburg. However, this was merely a prologue to the main strategic operation. D'Eon's primary trump card in his struggle for survival was not rumors, but real, exceedingly dangerous secrets. During his years of service in the King's Secret, he had amassed an arsenal of documents, compromising material on influential figures, details of Louis XV's secret negotiations, correspondence with agents revealing the true objectives of French foreign policy. He knew of invasion plans for England, of double-dealing with Austria, and of financial machinations at court. These papers, stored in London, were a ticking time bomb, capable of detonating not only careers, but also international relations. D'Eon perfectly understood their value and began using them as a tool for blackmail. He didn't merely threaten to publish them, he skillfully manipulated rumors of their existence, making the French court nervous and compelling them to negotiate. His demands were not simply a return to Paris, but also recognition of his services, the payment of a lifelong pension, and most crucially, official acknowledgement of his female sex. It was this final demand, to live as a woman, that became the central element of his grandiose deal with the crown. In 1775, after long and arduous negotiations, Louis XVI, successor to the late Louis XV, initiated the so-called d'Eon affair. The king, alarmed by the potential publication of secret documents, agreed to the Chevalier's terms. A treaty was signed, under which d'Eon surrendered all compromising papers to the French crown in exchange for an annual pension of 12,000 livres and the right to return to France. However, the condition was strict and public. He was not only to declare himself a woman, but also to live as a woman for the rest of his days. This was an unprecedented act, unparalleled in history. A man, a brilliant warrior and diplomat, publicly renounced his male identity, turning it into a bargaining chip in a political game. Soon after, in 1777, Charles d'Eon returned to Paris, first as the Chevalier de Beaumont and then as Mademoiselle d'Eon. Society avidly watched this metamorphosis, and many were convinced that he had always been a woman, simply skillfully hidden. This deal not only saved him from financial ruin and persecution, but also definitively cemented his new female identity in the public consciousness, transforming him into a living legend, or rather, a carefully constructed myth. D'Eon didn't merely adopt a new identity, he masterfully managed its perception. He understood with striking intuition the psychology of the crowd and the mechanisms of public opinion formation in an era where rumor was stronger than fact. His personal arsenal included not only a sharp mind and fencing prowess, but also a masterful command of self-presentation. He was not just an actor playing a role. He was the director, screenwriter, and producer of his own incredibly complex spectacle. One of his most powerful psychological tricks lay in the deliberate creation of ambiguity. He never definitively declared his sex. Instead, he allowed speculation to proliferate, turning into a collective obsession. This created a vacuum that a sensation-hungry public eagerly filled with theories, rumors, and ultimately, wagers. The betting pools that swept through Parisian salons and London coffeehouses were not an accidental byproduct. They were a brilliantly orchestrated mechanism to amplify his fame. By turning his very existence into a public game, he ensured constant discussion, keeping himself at the center of attention even when his political career lay in ruins. He understood that in the 18th century attention economy, any attention, even scandalous, was valuable. His influence extended beyond mere rumor-mongering. D'Eon meticulously selected and manipulated experts to corroborate his claims. He consulted doctors, often those with dubious reputations or a penchant for sensationalism, to examine him and offer their professional opinions on his true sex. These statements, regardless of their scientific validity, were then amplified through pamphlets and whispers, lending an air of legitimacy to his fabricated reality. He became a master at feeding specific narratives to journalists and pamphleteers, ensuring that the public discourse aligned with his strategic goals. He didn't just disseminate information, he curated it, crafting a compelling, albeit entirely fictitious, personal history that resonated with the era's fascination with the bizarre and the extraordinary. Beyond external manipulations, d'Eon possessed a striking capacity for personal adaptation. The man who for 5 decades had embodied the epitome of male strength and intellectual superiority, a diplomat, a soldier, a scholar, smoothly transitioned into a female persona. This was not a sudden, unthinking shift. It was a calculated, deliberate adoption of a new identity, honed by years of secret operations where disguise and deception were second nature. He drew upon his experience as a secret agent, where adopting aliases and maintaining complex legends were essential for survival. His ability to internalize and externally project this new role down to the nuances of clothing, gestures, and even voice speaks volumes about his deep psychological resilience and strategic genius. He understood that for a lie to become plausible, he had to live it absolutely and completely. This radical metamorphosis, born of desperation, became his ultimate act of survival and defiance, transforming him from a disgraced agent into an impenetrable enigma. The enigma of the Chevalier d'Eon did not arise in a vacuum. It was the result of a fierce clash with powerful figures at the French court, whose intrigues cost him his career but paradoxically paved the way for his boldest maneuver. D'Eon's primary adversary, who sought to crush him, was the Comte de Guerchy, the French ambassador in London. Their conflict, which began as mere rivalry and mutual accusations, quickly escalated into a personal vendetta. D'Eon publicly accused Guerchy of attempted poisoning, while the ambassador sought his arrest and deportation to France. This feud, escalating to an unprecedented scale, not only damaged both their reputations, but also became a public scandal, extremely inconvenient for the royal court. However, behind Guerchy stood other, more influential players. Among them was the Duc de Broglie, former head of the king's secret, once D'Eon's patron but later his sworn enemy, who feared the former agent's revelations and uncontrolled activities. These individuals, accustomed to operating in the shadows, underestimated Charles d'Eon's desperation and ingenuity. They sought to destroy him, but instead gifted him his most potent weapon, his secrets and his mutable identity. The court, confronted with the threat of compromising documents being published, found itself caught between the hammer and the anvil. The scandal surrounding d'Eon had already become a European sensation, and his papers could undermine the foundations of French foreign policy, shatter alliances, and provoke wars. At this critical juncture, Pierre-Augustin Caron de Beaumarchais, the eminent playwright and future author of The Barber of Seville and The Marriage of Figaro, himself a master of intrigue and negotiation, entered the scene. Acting on behalf of Louis XVI, Beaumarchais assumed the role of mediator in these incredibly complex and delicate negotiations. He was the ideal figure. His sharp mind, charisma, and experience in resolving intricate legal disputes and secret diplomatic missions allowed him to find common ground with both the disgraced d'Eon and the nervous French court. Beaumarchais didn't merely convey messages, he actively shaped the terms of the deal, understanding that for d'Eon, the question of his sex had become not merely a personal choice, but a political and financial necessity. It was Beaumarchais who convinced the king that the only way to retrieve the dangerous documents and put an end to the scandal was to satisfy d'Eon's main demand, official recognition of his female identity and the provision of a lifelong pension. For the court, this was humiliating but unavoidable. They were forced to acknowledge not only d'Eon as financial demands, but also his right to an unprecedented gender transformation in order to save face and preserve state secrets. Beaumarchais, in turn, reaped his own benefits from this deal. He strengthened his position at court, demonstrated his indispensability, and possibly even received certain financial rewards, the details of which remain hidden in the labyrinthine court archives. Thus, the story of the Chevalier d'Eon is not merely the drama of one individual, but a mirror reflecting the corruption and intricate power dynamics of the 18th century. His enemies, seeking to destroy him, inadvertently created a myth that not only saved his life, but also forever etched his name into history as a symbol of an era where politics, espionage, and personal identity could be interwoven into one incredible and scandalous knot. They became the unwitting co-authors of his legend, and Beaumarchais its brilliant architect, ensuring official recognition. The Chevalier d'Eon, now Mademoiselle d'Eon, returned to France, but the world he had left as a man no longer existed. His new life, though it provided security, was far from his former glory. He lived in relative poverty. His pension was often delayed or withheld entirely by the French court, which, having secured its secrets, quickly lost interest in its unusual protégé. Society, while accustomed to his female appearance, continued to view him more as a curiosity than an influential figure. Mademoiselle d'Eon continued to wear women's clothing, but did not abandon her fencing prowess, staging exhibition matches in a skirt, further fueling rumors and speculation about her true nature. These years became a long, at times exhausting, epilogue to his grand drama. He didn't merely play a role, he lived it, proving to the world his capacity for any transformation for survival. But all things come to an end. Decades later, in 1810, Charles d'Eon died in London at the age of 82. And then, in the quiet of the morgue, when the body could no longer hold secrets, came the moment of ultimate, merciless revelation. An autopsy, conducted by doctors, left no doubt the Chevalier d'Eon's anatomy was male. This was not merely a medical fact, it was a stunning, definitive blow to the myth that d'Eon had so skillfully constructed for over 30 years. The betting pools closed, and all wagers were nullified. Society, which had debated his sex for years, received irrefutable proof. This confirmed not an innate femininity, but rather the grandeur of his acting prowess and strategic genius. The final act of his life became the culmination of the entire intrigue, irrefutable evidence that his female identity was nothing more than a brilliantly performed role, a tool for survival, not his true nature. This unmasking did not humiliate him, it merely underscored the magnitude of his personality, his ability to manipulate reality, and his excellent use of circumstances to his advantage. Until his last breath, he remained the greatest mystifier of the 18th century, whose final secret was only revealed after his death, forever cementing his status as one of history's most enigmatic figures. However, this posthumous autopsy, conducted by British medics, not only dismantled decades of intrigue, but also had very concrete financial and political consequences. Thousands of pounds sterling, wagered on his sex in Parisian salons and London clubs, instantly turned to dust. The betting pools that had operated on this living enigma closed, declaring all wagers void. No one won, but many lost, as gambling on another's identity did not entail a return on investment in such an outcome. The value of this ore, the very mystery of his sex, upon which entire fortunes and reputations had been built, was nullified, leaving behind only the bitter taste of dashed expectations and confirmation of one man's unprecedented ability to manipulate reality. For the French crown, or more precisely, for its historical legacy, this was yet another posthumous blow. Louis XVI, who had struck the deal with d'Eon, publicly recognizing him as a woman in exchange for the dangerous documents, now appeared as a monarch completely deceived by his former agent. This revelation, occurring already in the Napoleonic era when the Bourbons had long lost their throne, only underscored the weakness and naivety of the Ancien Regime. It served as a vivid testament to how deeply corruption and intrigue had penetrated the highest echelons of power, forcing the king to make unprecedented concessions for the preservation of state secrets. Financially, the French treasury, which had paid d'Eon his pension, ultimately received the documents, but at the cost of reputational damage that only became evident many years later. Thus, the posthumous unmasking of the Chevalier d'Eon definitively closed the era of a grand deception, leaving behind not only a story of incredible survival, but also a bitter lesson about the cost of secrets and the nature of power. Yet even the definitive anatomical conclusion could not entirely erase the image that Charles d'Eon had so masterfully constructed. Society, hungry for sensation, preferred to believe in the romantic legend of a female spy expertly disguised as a man, rather than the prosaic truth of a forced transformation. Here lies the greatest paradox of his legacy. A brilliant diplomat and warrior whose male exploits saved the crown entered history primarily as Mademoiselle d'Aon, whose female identity became the central part of his myth. He transformed into a symbol of an era where skillfully constructed public perception could outweigh undeniable facts. The story of the Chevalier d'Aon is not merely a chronicle of incredible survival, but a profound reflection on how easily truth yields to a more captivating narrative, and how sometimes the boldest lie becomes the most enduring truth in the collective consciousness.